You've probably seen news articles like this one. The Wall Street Journal says CEOs are shrinking their workforces and they couldn't be prouder. Now, in the whisper networks that I have been privileged to join because of my work on post-labor economics, this is actually very true, and it's also what's happening behind the scenes, where every company that is deploying AI and using it to reduce headcount, they're all salivating about how much they can save, on the bottom dollar on headcount because humans are very expensive to employ. Now, of course, if you do some cursory research into this, you'll see people saying, it's the tariffs, it's other economic concerns, it's the Doge layoffs. And so what I really wanted to do was do some research and crunch some hard numbers and figure out how many jobs, see if we could figure out how many jobs this year have been reduced or avoided due to artificial intelligence. Now, a recent report showed that it's about 80,000 to 100,000. So we can go from that, but here's the numbers that I came to and the methodology that I used. And I used several AI tools. I used a combination of ChatGPT, Gemini, and Grok to cross-validate and cross-check everything that you see here. And this infographic was actually generated by Gemini. So if you didn't know Gemini could do that, now you do. All right, so bottom line up front is that we found that there's probably about 300,000 to 500,000 missing jobs due in large part to artificial intelligence as of end of July 2025. Now, the official layoffs due to AI is only about 20 to 30,000. So let's see if we can explain the difference here. So first, part one, the layoffs that are officially acknowledged. So in terms of surveys that have gone out, only about 10,000 were explicitly saying we laid you off because of AI. Another 20,000 said that it was because of technological updates, and then a further 20,000 said reason not specified, which could be anything, restructuring, that sort of stuff. So depending on how you read this, it's anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 jobs have been explicitly acknowledged to be, or implied to be, artificial intelligence as a potential reason for the layoff. Now, that is a far cry from the 80,000 that some people are reporting, or 100,000 that other people are reporting, and it's certainly a far cry from the 300 to 500,000 jobs that I'm reporting. So let's look at the data and see if we can figure it out. Now, one thing that you need to know is that basically what I'm doing here is I'm using the same logic that David Autor, an economist from MIT, used a couple decades ago to find the missing millions jobs in manufacturing, where what you do is you look at the total headcount, the nominal headcount of employees in a given sector or industry, and then you look at the economic output of that industry or sector, and then you say, okay, how much more productive are people being? And based on previous, how much, labor went into a particular unit of productivity was used to generate that level of output in the past. So in Q2 of 2025, we saw real GDP growth of 3%, but we saw a decline in aggregate weekly hours of minus 0.3. So if hours of labor goes in, and that number goes down, but output still goes up, that's a gap. So this shows that we should have had quite a bit more labor. So automation can be generally directly accused, I guess, of covering that gap, because if you achieve more with fewer people, that is exactly the point of automation. That's what we saw with the last 2 centuries of automation in agriculture, where it went from 70 to 90% of people were employed in agriculture two centuries ago. Then a century ago it was only 40, and today it's only 2%. So agriculture is many times more efficient than it was. So you get a lot more output with a lot less labor input. Next is the payroll share gap. So similarly, when you look at the actual payrolls that companies are sending out versus their quarterly reportings, the corporate profits as a percentage of GDP are 11 and 12%. So we're near record highs for corporate profits, but payroll declined 1%. So that is a much more direct linking the fact that companies are making more money with less people. Now, you can, of course, say some of that could be, price gouging. This is something that we saw during the pandemic, for instance, where a lot of corporations were making all-time high profits because of price gouging and inflation and a few other things. But that's not happening this time. And so when you see that the GDP is going up and hours worked is going down, when you see that corporate profits are up but payrolls are down, that's a pretty strong indicator. Now, you might say, okay, well, Dave, if you're saying that 300,000 workers to 500,000 workers, where did they go? Why are they not being represented in unemployment? And the reason is right here, evidence C, discouraged worker surge. In the last quarter alone, we went up from 1.5 million marginally attached workers to 1.8 million. That's 300,000 people joining the marginally attached group. Likewise, we went from about 370,000 discouraged workers last quarter to 637,000. So that's about 250,000 people joining the discouraged workers. So this is what we're seeing is downward mobility. So this is all what you'd expect to see in the ramp up towards post-labor economics. Now, so that's the primary evidence that I have, the primary data. So then to add a little bit of context, what we saw in the last quarter was that there was about a net of about 800,000 job cuts in America in the last quarter. And so 300 to 500,000 is not necessarily a job cut. What some of these are is labor that was made invalid or not needed. So some of the missing millions, I guess it's missing hundreds of thousands, it's not missing millions yet. But some of those missing jobs are just jobs that dried up. There was no, someone quit or retired or was laid off, and then no new job posting in that same category was created. So, however, when we look at the data and we look at, economic headwinds and you look at tariff impacts and Doge cuts, that still only adds up to about 300,000 or so, maybe 400,000 if you're being really, really charitable, which is only about half of the jobs that were cut over the last quarter. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, yes, there are other things going on. And one of the most important things is the knock-on effects of the Doge cuts. So one thing that people are pointing out is that when you cut 300,000 government workers, that offsets a lot of livelihoods. And then the spending that those families had goes down. The services that they bought goes down as well, which can have then spillover effects. So you might say, well, some of this could be explained by those spillover effects. But if that was the case, if it was just spillover effects, then you wouldn't expect corporate profits to still be this high or GDP growth to be that high. So if this is why, by the way, this is why Julie and I call it the great decoupling, is because GDP and corporate returns are decoupling from human labor. So labor down, profit up. That is the great decoupling. That is the intrinsic nature of post-labor economics and exactly what you expect to see during a surge of automation. So now here in part 4, I wanted to provide even more long-term context, because when you're looking at unemployment percentages and those sorts of things, it's kind of confusing because sometimes you just want to look at the absolute numbers. So here we have the total amount of actual employment in America. So we have right now close to 160 million people employed in America, 159,724,000 as of June 2025. Now this number keeps going up. What you're seeing here, this sharp rise, is the COVID pandemic recovery. So nominally, this looks good. But at the same time, remember that the American population has also gone up due to births and immigration. Now, obviously, immigration is under siege right now, but they're not removing nearly as many people as has come in. So when you add population growth, people coming in for work, and the whole economy recovering from the pandemic, this is kind of what you'd expect to see. But you can see that it's definitely slowing down. So then, when you look at labor force participation rate, so this is basically you take everyone who is working age and whether or not they are working, we saw that it was down around 61.5% in the middle of the pandemic. It peaked in a couple years later at 62.6%, and now it has started to drift back down. This means this is where you're seeing a gap where we went from, last year, June 2024, 62.6%, and now in June 2025, 62.3%. Now, you might say that's only a few tenths of a percentage, but when you're talking about literally more than 100 million people, that actually adds up to quite a number of actual humans who have lost their jobs. So then when you look at the total employment to population ratio, it looks even worse. So this is total number of employees over, so that's the numerator, and the denominator is the total population. So even though the absolute number of jobs is still creeping up slowly, when you look at just what percentage of Americans are actually working, it peaked in 2023 at 60.3% and then started creeping back down, and now it is below 60%. It's 59.7%. So this actually shows a little bit steeper of a decline. Now, some of that is going to be that people aged out of the workforce. The boomers are about to retire en masse, although many of them are sticking around longer. So when you take all that into account, it still doesn't account for the fact that productivity is up and corporate profits are up. So when you add all these numbers together, and by the way, you can get this link in the comments, I'll have it pinned. When you add all the numbers up and you look at all the economic models, you're looking at that we're actually have a missing 300 to 500,000 jobs this year, due in part to AI. So this is explicitly where you say, okay, AI has invalidated the need for a job, or implicitly where someone left or someone quit or new hiring just didn't happen because instead of hiring a human, they hired an AI instead. So thanks for watching to the end. I hope you got a lot out of this. Link is in the description, and have a nice day. Cheers.